back of the pack ultra guy here. This week's guest is Scott Imlay. Now, we have had Cassidy on, and she was the DFL for the female at Arizona Monster 300. And I didn't realize it until I saw a Destination Trails social media post that Scott, who we have on today, and Cassidy crossed at the same time. As we heard on Cassidy's episode, Scott and Cassidy are actually friends. They're ultra friends from meeting each other at a race years ago and then spending some time at the same races over the years. So I'm just really excited to talk to Scott, because how rare is it that you have two people cross at the same time, DFL, and they're friends? So this is going to be really exciting to visit with him. So Scott and I were introduced through Cassidy. I found him on social media, and Cassidy recommended we visit, and so just super excited for this. But without further ado, I'll turn the time over to Scott. Scott, would you just mind telling us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and kind of how you found your way into endurance and into the ultra world?
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in Seattle, Washington, where I still live pretty much, in the suburbs of Seattle. Yeah, born here, raised here. I spent a couple of years in Minnesota, but other than that, it's been all Seattle. And I did some running in junior high. I was in track in junior high, but nothing special. I did the 800 meter or the 880 yard race, as we called it then. Ran in college just for fun. Did some 10Ks. They didn't really have 5Ks back then, but 10Ks. Continued that until about 35, and life got in the way at that point. Had a daughter, and things got busy at work, and didn't really do any running until my early 50s, when I had a kind of a chest pain scare. Ended up going to the hospital, and they checked it out, and it was just some sort of a gastrointestinal thing, probably, they said. But the cardiologist sat me down and he said, based on your history and your family history and your blood work, you're going to have a heart attack by the time you're 60 if you don't do something. So that was the impetus for me to do something. Wow. So I decided to do triathlon, because I had tried a few times to do just running again, which had been my jam when I was younger. But I always end up getting hurt, and then you get hurt, then you stop because you're hurt, and by the time you start again, you're back to square one. So I thought, all right, well, if I'm also swimming and biking, well, at least I'll be getting some fitness, that'll help my blood work or whatever, even though I can't run. And so I did that. Kind of went up through the stages in triathlon slowly. I was about 53, I guess, and started, eventually worked up to Ironman triathlons, which I did a couple of. And then my switch to ultras occurred with COVID. I think that's a fairly common theme, right? Because the triathlon's all shut down. Mm-hmm. And you say, well, what can I do? And we have a lot of trails in the Seattle area. So I started running trails, and some of my Ironman friends planned a Grand Canyon rim to rim to rim at the end of October in 2020. And I said, okay, I'll do that. And so that was kind of my introduction to the long distance running. I only did a rim to rim. Fortunately, we had someone on the North Rim, because I was wiped by the time I got to the North Rim.
I don't know, Scott, about you, but the first time I ever descended into the canyon and then got to the other side and looked up, that's a climb. There's no way around it. You kind of stand there at the bottom and go, well, my options are I either sit on a donkey and get out, I get a helicopter ride somehow, or I just got to climb out. It's daunting, because you look up and it's just this straight up.
Yeah.
So yeah,
and it was hot. It's the end of October and it was still hot. It was,
Yep.
you know, being from Seattle, you don't get much of the heat acclimation, especially that time of the year. So yeah. Anyway, it was enough to convince me I really wanted to do this, and so that I made the switch at that point, and kind of worked my way up in distances and the ultras as well, until started doing the 200s. But yeah.
Now, I'd be interested to hear, Scott, because that's kind of it's funny to say dip your toe in, because the Grand Canyon's like not the easiest place to start. So you jumped right in, and then in the Seattle, the Pacific Northwest, there's a ton of races. I'd love to hear about your first event. What was it?
Yeah, well, my first one was actually the year before. I decided I did try 50K the year before COVID, and that was it was by Rain Shadow Running, and it was the Deception Pass 50K. And I, thought, well, this is only a little more than a marathon. This should be easy, And of course, it wasn't at all easy, because it's rough trails and 5,000 feet of gain, and but it's beautiful. It was a beautiful race. It's on. It was in December. It's on. The pass they're talking about is actually the passage between the mainland and Whidbey Island, and so there's a bridge that goes over that passage, and so you run back and forth across the bridge twice, and then it's just mountains on either side, and a lot of mud, but yeah, that was a good experience. I was still into the triathlons at that point, but it still was a good experience. How was my next big one? Well, in 2020 there weren't a whole lot of races, so it was mostly just running, on my own or with friends. I did in pretty early start volunteering at Bigfoot 200, and so I kind of at that point knew I wanted to do the 200s. I was at Twin Sisters, which is mile 150, and so people were coming in just wrecked. You know what I'm talking about. People are they're incoherent. They're barely able to stand up, and for some reason I looked at that and thought, yeah, that's something I want to do. And, I don't know what's wrong with me.
It's so true, though. It's so true, because, I don't know about you, but I was talking to a guest a few weeks ago about watching Iron Man on TV. That was kind of the first, when I first got exposed to endurance sport. They're playing these finish line videos, or people are collapsing, or they collapse before the finish line, and someone's helping them across. And like you, I was like, oh, I kind of want to do that. And it's like, what? Who are you? But then you get into ultra and you finish your 50K and you go, oh, I didn't collapse. And then you go up in distance. Oh, I wasn't there yet. But then you go, like you said, volunteer, and you see this carnage, mile 150 or 180, and you just go, yes, that's it. That's what I'm looking for, this extreme challenge. It's just weird that it draws some people in, and other people just go, no thanks. But some other people go, wow, that looks really interesting.
Yeah, that's my wife. She has no clue why I do this. But yeah, it's I don't know. There's something you can't really experience, or most people don't experience what you experience in a 200, right? Our ancestors did, right? They walked across the United States to get to the West Coast or whatever. But yeah, modern humans really don't experience that, and there's something special about it. It's hard, extremely hard, but also it's an experience that I think is really special. So yeah.
And there's definitely I don't know if it's evolutionary. I'm definitely not educated enough to know the answer to this, but there's something inside of a human that when you're out in nature and you're, like doing a 200 or maybe a 100, a hard 100-mile, mountain race, and you just feel like it's connecting you to something out there. Like, and it may be our ancestors, like you said, that had to do these incredible feats, but you just feel connected to nature, connected to our past, whatever it is. It just feels right. Maybe not in the moment, a little bit in the moment, but ultimately you go, yeah, this is, you really feel like this is something that you were meant to do. Not saying every human has to do a 200, but it would, but there's definitely something connection to evolution, or I don't know, but I agree with you. There's definitely a calling to your, at least to me, I feel like to your soul, right? Where you go, I'm going to do that. What was your first 100, if you don't mind me asking? Or did you
just pick that Grandmaster? It was the Grandmaster Ultras. So now I've done 4 of them now, so that would have been 2022, I guess. I looked at that, and I mean, as an old guy, one of my concerns is pace, right, and being able to finish. And that's intended. It's only for people age 55, I believe, or maybe 50 and over. So it's in northwest Arizona, kind of along the freeway between Las Vegas and St. George and Salt Lake City.
Interesting.
Just where that freeway cuts through the corner of Arizona. And so it's it's in February every year. And so that was my first one. I hurt myself in the first 10 miles. I was trying to run. It was really rocky, and pulled a hamstring, and so I ended up walking the rest of it. So I was really thankful for the 48-hour cutoff.
Well, that's rough country out there. I mean, for the people who haven't driven through there, or even spend any time out there, that's really rough country. It's not like a walk in the park, for sure. That's really
no, it's pretty rough. Place. It's very rocky, a lot of sand, and I mean, it is mostly on ATV trails, but it still is. It's pretty rough, and sometimes the ATV trails are even worse, because the rocks, it kicks up the sand, so you get really deep sand, then the rocks are all loose, and they roll, except for the occasional one that doesn't, and you kick it and then you go down. And so,
I mean, I don't know about you, but I'd almost rather have rocky kind of technical terrain that's firm over sand. Maybe it's my personal thing. I have an aversion to sand, where I'm like, I see a large section of sand, I'm just like, can I go around it?
Yeah.
Because it's tough. It's just extra effort to get through that.
Yeah, no, I agree. So it was fun. I met a friend that I've done that same race with every year. He's a guy from Texas, Max, and he comes out, and so once a year we trudge through the desert for a day or so, and talk about life, and it's a good warm up too, because I do it slow, I kind of intentionally do it at a 200 pace, so that I can warm up. For instance, I did it this year. It's only a little over a month before the 300. But since I'm doing it at a slower pace, I'm not killing myself, and hopefully not injuring myself.
Yeah, it's funny to think of the evolution of the sport, where now we're saying, yeah, I mean, I just take this 100-miler. It's just really a good warm up for my longer. Whereas a few years ago, the 100 was it. It's just like that was the top of the top. And obviously, there's different hundreds and skill levels and things like that. But still, it's like we're talking about an insane distance as a training run for an even more insane distance.
Yeah. Yes.
It's really neat to see how it's evolved. But all this while, you have been, at this time on a timeline, it sounds like you've been volunteering at Bigfoot.
Yeah, I started out volunteering at the aid stations, and then I started course marking, which I really enjoy. And I still do that. I even did that at the Arizona 300 before I ran it. It's you get, for one thing, you get to see the entire course, or the parts you see at least, in the daylight. So there's sections, at most of these races, there's sections you would never see in the daylight just because of where they lie in the race. And some of them are pretty incredible views. And Bigfoot, one of them is Mount Margaret. It used to be that you would never see Mount Margaret in the daylight, you go up to the top of this mountain with this beautiful overlook of Spirit Lake and Mount St. Helens, and the blast zone of Mount St. Helens, and it's a real shame that people are always there in the dark. but if you course mark, you get to see it in the daylight.
Well, I have to tell you, I hate to pause us here, but I have always wanted to talk to a course marker because I've noticed, and this is just me, and maybe it's that others have noticed this too, but as you're going along these longer events, it's less prominent in the shorter events, but as you go through these longer events, maybe 100-mile plus, these multi-day events, you can really tell that there is one person that's marked a course, because then you get through that section and then all of a sudden the course markings don't change, but the amount of course markings may have changed, or the where they place them. I've always wanted to talk to a course marker because some of those sections where someone's marked it, you're like, I don't even know where I'm going. And then other times it's like you can just shut your mind off and you just can go because the course is so marked so well, like at critical junctions, or I would love to hear about it, because it almost feels like some of those sections, someone like yourself who has experience at races goes, at night, someone's going to want a course marking right here. I'm going to put one right here. Whereas if somebody who's never done a longer event would be like, oh, I'll put one here and maybe over here. It just seems like there's experience behind it. So I'd love to hear about it.
No, I think you're right. Part of it is, I've only course marked for the destination trail races, so I don't know about the other ones. But they have when I first started, it was pretty much just, you didn't have much guidance, other than you learned from someone with experience, but then you didn't have much guidance. They've really changed that up now. You get a 3 or 4 page email from Candace that's, you do this, we mark every so often. Now, one thing that has changed a lot over the years is how frequently you mark the confidence markers, I should say. You have marking when there's confusion, you have to mark then. But if it's just kind of a straight section, like on the Arizona Trail, every once in a while you put out a marker. And it's switched from every fifth of a mile, which is the last one. It was every 4 to 5 markers per mile. 2 years ago, it was every mile. And I think what drives that really depends on different factors. Some areas, you have locals that really don't like all the markers. It kind of makes them angry. And so then you don't want to mark too much, because you don't want to, then they're going to come out and they're going to pull them down, right? Which isn't good either.
No.
And then, of course, you need to mark enough that people have confidence. So it's hard. But yeah, there's a couple things that really make it tricky. One is sometimes we mark backwards just because it's more convenient for the transportation. So, for instance, we might all go out and you'll have 3 cars, and you'll put 2 cars at 2 ends of 2 sections, and then we'll all hop in 1 car and we'll drive to where the 2 sections meet, and then we'll mark out, 1 forward on the trail and 1 backward on the trail. And it's really hard to remember that you're going backwards. And some of these sections you're thinking may have been marked backwards because, you're going along and, and you're thinking, oh, here's an intersection. I need to mark this intersection. But you mark the wrong side. And so somebody coming up won't even see it because it's, hiding behind a bush or whatever,
Sure.
and there's no marking on the other side of the intersection. So you have to really focus if you're marking backwards so that you get it correct. And so that's another factor, is just which direction you're marking. But yeah, there's a lot of variability, and I think it's also easy to get distracted because we usually do it as a team, so there'll be 2 or 3 people marking a section because you're carrying a fair amount of stuff. You're carrying stakes and signs and hammers and staplers and of course all the flagging is heavier than you would expect. Plus, you need all of the stuff you would normally need when you're out doing 20-mile section, right?
Yeah.
Water and emergency gear and things like that. And so, but sometimes you get busy talking to the person and you forget to put a flag up. So you have to guard against that too, But yeah, it does make a big difference whether somebody has run these before, because we get different people. So some people are just we get a fair number of thru hikers, at least with the destination trail crew, and of course they're great. They're real, they're physically fit and are great on the trails. But they don't necessarily know what the runners need unless they've done it before. So they usually try to pair them with a runner.
I'd like to know, Scott, ballpark's fine, but like how Arizona Monster or a 200, how long does it take for all the volunteers to mark that course?
Yeah, for the Arizona 300, we had 3 teams. And we were there. We showed up on Friday the 13th of March, and so that's a Friday, and then we were done by the following Sunday. So it was 8 days. And
that's incredible.
So some of the days were pretty long. The big section was, we had 3 sections that were over 20 miles. One of them was the sections from Picket Post down to Gila River, which is actually on the first day of the course, and that the way we did it is we marked Picket Post down to Gila River, and then we marked from the Grand Enchantment aid station, which is the other end of the long section, back to Gila River, and then we just crossed the river, and there was we had somebody on the other side of the river to pick us up and take us back to our camp. So yeah, I forgot what the question was actually.
No. What I'm getting at is what the point I'm wanting to drive home to the listeners is we show up for these races as contestants, and we just, I think a lot of times take for granted the amount of effort that went into putting the event on. Yeah. I mean, just imagine all of the phone calls about permitting, all of the calls about logistics, nailing down the food and sourcing all the food and sponsorships. Then you've got course marking 8 days and 3 teams of volunteers. Guys and gals, this is like a huge undertaking.
It is.
And we look at these race fees and they are going up, but everything in this world is going up. I don't think anything's getting cheaper. And you just go, as you break down what you're actually paying for and what's happening, there's a lot that goes into these races. It's not just a 5K, right? It's not like you run down this road and turn right at the end and you're done. This is a huge undertaking, and it's just so neat to hear more of the inside logistics of it, because it just never ceases to amaze me. For one, the ultra community just is some of the best people in the world, but the amount of people that come together to make this happen. the race director, no offense to any race director, but they get all the credit, right? Like it's Candace or Jamil or whoever, they're putting it on, and then everyone behind the scenes is like, well, what about us? We're out here for 8 days marking the trail. It's just amazing to me the amount of effort that goes into these events, especially these longer events.
Yeah, the Arizona Monster, it's the 13th, it was the start of course marking. The end of the race was what was it, the 4th or the 5th? And then another day or so to break down. So you're talking, pushing a month. Between 3 weeks and a month that people are out there, and there's a lot of volunteers that are there for the whole time. And it's like almost a second job, right? That's a long time to devote to this race, and it's fun, obviously. Otherwise, people wouldn't do it. It's a great community, honestly. If somebody is thinking about it, they should do it. And you don't have to do the whole time, obviously, but you should volunteer. You would enjoy it. It's hard work, but it's also a great community.
Yeah, another thing to mention here too is I had a guest on who has created a volunteer group in Utah for trail maintenance. And that's another thing that I think we forget about is, the desert, a little bit different. There's not much growing, but, in the Northwest or up in Utah, Colorado, these trails don't take care of themselves, and there is also a huge effort that goes into preparing the trail to be marked and to have the actual event take place. So there's just so much that goes into these that maybe I'm speaking just for myself, but that I've taken for granted, and I think other people may be as well. Just think I'm going to sign up, and you're busy with all your personal logistics and pacing schedules and all this. I think it's nice to sit back and actually acknowledge how much effort goes into these events, how much people's time. It never ceases to amaze me in watching people come together and maintain the trail, set up the race, take it down. I know it's not ultra, but like at the Spartan races, they have semi trucks, like tractor trailers full of stuff that they drive in, they set it all up. And I've seen some of these, at least with Air Viper races, these huge box trucks that pull in, and there's so much equipment. There's so much that goes into these races. So quick shout out to all the volunteers, Scott yourself, shout out to you. Everyone who's doing this, it's amazing work, and thank you for doing it, because without you guys, that's a lot of work to do on your own. I don't think you could do it. So kudos to everybody who's out there volunteering.
Yeah, I think they typically have almost as many volunteers as they have runners.
Wow.
Just if you count all the volunteers for the whole period. So yeah, if you're thinking of the cost of entry, that also comes into play. The volunteers don't get paid, except in, race credits. Most races offer race credits, and so.
And I'm sure as a business, they factor that into the cost.
Sure,
They'd have to. Yeah. But so thank you for that, and all the other volunteers. I've had the privilege of volunteering a little bit, but I think it's the best, and I need to do more of it, admittedly. But I think it's one of the best ways to get an upfront, front row seat if you're ultra curious at all.
Yeah.
Because you really see, as you mentioned, 150-mile mark at Bigfoot, you see the carnage, but you see the logistics, and you start to see how it's possible to do these races, and you go, I think Cassidy and I actually talked about this as well. You start to realize, oh, I could do this. Like, oh, I could really do this. If he's out here doing it, I think I could do it too. And so great way to get to dip your toe into ultra, and just, if you're curious at all, volunteer, crew, pace. Yeah. Anything along those lines, for sure.
People are always looking for more pacers.
Isn't that the truth? Kind of going back on the timeline a little bit, you're doing your hundreds. You've got your friend Max in Texas. What was your first 200 you did?
Well, my first attempt at a 200 was actually Tahoe in 2000, and actually it might have been that same year. And it was the year that Tahoe was moved because of the high snow levels. So they moved it to July. and it was exceptionally hot, and I just totally screwed up my nutrition and ended up only doing a 50K, the first 50K of it before I had to bail out. But yeah, that was, I did the course marking that year though, so I got to see most of the course. And Tahoe's beautiful. I still haven't done it, but I'd love to do it. I just learned that Cassidy actually is off the wait list, so she's doing it this year. So I'll probably
Cassidy, if you're listening to this, congratulations! That's awesome.
So that was my first attempt, and I have to admit I've failed more than I've succeeded. An interesting side, I'm kind of an analytical guy, and I've looked at all of the completions by age group. If you look at people under the age of 50, it's like 70 to 80% completion for 200 milers. But as you get up into the 60 to 64 range, it drops down just into the 50 something. 65 to 69, it's in the low 40s% completion rate. Above 70, it's like 10%. So it's a huge drop off as you age. It's one of the things I'm fighting as somebody in their late 60s is how do I break that? I want to keep going, and so how do I not become part of the average there? But anyway, I bring that up because I have DNF'd quite a bit, and so the next one was. Oh no! The next one actually was Bigfoot, and that was the one I completed with. That's where I met Cassidy. So I was out. It was the out and back here, and so I made it to the 50-mile mark, and I was going way too fast. I think I set my 50-mile PR. I was excited. I don't know, and so it was at the Klickitat aid station. I was just really sick, gastrointestinal distress, and just wanted to sleep. But it wasn't really a sleep station because it wasn't set up that way because it was they had to make last minute changes to the course because of the fire, and so. I was basically sitting in a chair trying to get back together, and then there's a group of mostly ladies who started talking about getting up and going, and I thought, if I don't do this, I'm going to quit here. So I just walked over and said, "Do you mind if I just tag along with you guys?" And they said, "Sure." And so Cassidy was one of them. I don't know if she was the one that was talking at this point. I can't really remember, but. And so there was about 10 of us, about half women, half men, and we headed out, and it sort of broke up. Eventually it was there were 4 of us that hung together for most of the race. Cassidy and I were amongst that 4, and then eventually it was just Cassidy and I that finished the line together. Although we had another guy that was with us most of the time. So I did 150 miles with Cassidy, and we finished. One of the age-related problems I have is the ultra lean. I'm sure you've seen this. Most of the older ultra runners, where at the end you're kind of over like this, and you're. It's a very interesting thing because it doesn't hurt initially. And you don't even know you have it. But eventually you start cramping up, and then it's just awful. So I ended up about the last 10 miles having the lean, but it wasn't enough to keep me from finishing. So that was the first finish, and I've DNF'd Moab twice now. I fell on the first one and hurt my hip at about mile 30, and I limped to the next aid station, and That was that year. And then I had the lean, and had really bad cramping, and I promised myself I wouldn't quit. But it slowed me down so much I missed the cutoff. And then it's the monster. That's the next one. So
Yeah.
I finished two in DNF 3 at this point.
I definitely want to get into the monster, but I will say that the ultra lean is a real thing. For anyone out there listening who's never seen it, when you see it, you'll know exactly what Scott's referring to, and you don't know you're doing it. I mean, I remember a few years ago, oh gosh, now probably 3 years ago, the DFL at Cocodona, he was all the way hunched over like this.
Yeah.
And had his poles, keeping him up, and he crossed the line like that. So it's definitely something that happens, and I'd love to speak to sports psychologist, not psychologist, some kinesiology, or whoever understands the body better than me, and see what that really is. But I could definitely see, Scott, that point you made about if you're leaning over while you're doing it, you may not feel it, but as you go on further and further, your body's having to support that unnatural lean. And that does make a lot of sense. I could see how that would really catch up to you quick.
Yeah. At Moab last year, when it eventually got to me, I was leaning for probably 30 miles before I knew it. And it wasn't until I was crossing the river, which is normally a dry river, but it was, because of the rain, it was flowing pretty good, that the photographer said to me, "You've got the lean." I thought, okay. So at Monster, I actually said to Cassidy, because we were together most of the time, I said, "If you see me leaning, let me know." And so for about the last 2 days, it seemed like every half hour or so she'd say, "Scott, you're leaning." And I was able at that point, I kind of knew I always leaned to the right, so I was able to make myself feel like I was leaning to the left. And I think that probably saved my race, because if you watched the finish, you could see I had the lean, but it wasn't so bad that it was painful. It was just an irritation at that point. But I'm sure I couldn't have gone 2 days without having severe cramping if I hadn't been actively trying to fight against it. Yeah, I've looked for information about research that researchers have done on the lean. The only thing I found is something from a professor at the University of Houston, and he's kind of reviewed the 6 most likely causes of the lean. And it doesn't really seem like anybody knows for sure what the cause is. It happens mostly in older runners, or more likely to happen in older runners, so it's probably related to muscle loss somehow, because that's one of the things that happens to us. There's other things that happen as you age, but that's a very common one, right? And so I've tried to focus on strength training, and I think that's helped some. Although the professor from the University of Houston said the research indicated it didn't help. He thinks it's caused by the gluten medius kind of giving out on one side, just kind of, it quits working. So at my side, it would be the left side. And then your body compensates by putting weight on the other side, and then to keep their center of gravity over where your foot is, it leans to the side, and so it seems like, and I've talked to a few people that have had it and dealt with it. The way to handle it is to just do some really hard massaging of your glute medius, like get a lacrosse ball at every aid station and just really grind it into your, gluteus medius, and just proactively, fight against it shutting down. I wish I had a better answer. I don't think there's a whole lot of money in research for, ultra runners in their 60s.
No giant grants for scientists to study the ultra lean. Oh man, yeah, it's so fascinating to me because we alluded to at the beginning this evolution of humans and how we obviously are, bipods, right? We're walking around. That's how we get around. But it would be so fascinating, if you go back into history and anytime humans have taken long treks, did they have the trek lean, right? The ultra lean, but did they got later in the trek, did they have the same experience? I imagine they probably did. But it's just so fascinating to me. Even with that, you obviously had Cassidy kind of catching you when you were leaning. You still finished the race, and I'd love to start to talk about the monster, but just quickly to cap the whole lean conversation off. But it's fascinating that physically what we can endure, as humans, and still finish the race. Because like you said, you don't think about it as a big deal, this lean, but it's not a natural position. It's putting extra stress on your body, and you can still finish even in that experience. It's just amazing to me what people can do. But I'd love to hear about the monster. Obviously, that's greater than 200 and even greater than 240 miles, and you finished it. So I'd love to hear about that experience.
Yeah, the first day was super hot, as you and Cassidy talked about that. I had been there course marking, which actually helped me because I live in, like I mentioned before, in Seattle, and so getting down there in the desert in the heat for a couple weeks beforehand really helped get my body used to it. But even then, it was just so hot, and it just watching the weather forecast going up to it, and it was all these record temperatures in Phoenix, and and so it was kind of nerve-wracking, but it went pretty well. They had ice at the beginning, so I had not a bandana, but I had a neck gaiter full of ice, and so to the first aid station now, that really helped, keep me cool, and then filled it up again. Then we headed out, and on the next section is when things kind of went south, in terms of, it was still hot even though it was getting dark, and I started getting dehydrated. I had 5 liters of water with me, and I was drinking as much as I could, but my mouth, this has happened in the desert a couple of times with me, my mouth got super dry, even though, I think I was hydrated, I was still peeing just fine, but my mouth was dry, I was getting canker sores, and my lips were super chapped, and get to the point where you can't swallow without having a mouthful of water, and so that makes it hard to eat the way you should be eating, and anyway, I got really nauseated, which makes it even harder, and so and I have issues. I have sleep apnea, so I have issues with sleep to begin with, and so the sleep deprivation I don't know, but I believe it's maybe a little harder than for someone who doesn't deal with those sleep issues. And so I started having I don't know if it was the lack of nutrition or the lack of sleep, because it's so early in the race, it shouldn't have been the lack of sleep, but I started having a lot of issues with just where my eyes couldn't focus, which is usually a sleep deprivation thing. So anyway, we eventually made it down to Gila River aid station, and they had to move the aid station across the river for logistical reasons. So we had to cross the river to the aid station, then cross it on the way back. and so that slowed us down a little bit. Anyway, the net result was we got to where we were really pushing the cutoff, and in the first to mile 50, basically, Grand Enchantment Aid Station is the tightest cutoffs. You have to maintain 2.5 miles per hour, which for most people sounds really easy, right? But
that trail is so rough. I mean,
yeah.
I know we talked about it with Cassidy, but until you actually see it, it's very, very rough terrain. There's no groomed trails. It's very rough.
Yeah. And so, anyway, this is probably the first place that Cassidy saved my race, because I had to lay down because I just couldn't see the trail anymore, and we were pushing the cutoffs, and so I told her to go ahead, and she was going ahead to the aid station, but she kind of looked at me and she said, "Don't give up," and I said, "I won't." And that was, I'm not sure I would have made it if I hadn't made that promise. It's like, okay, I can't give up. And so I ended up running pretty much the last 5 miles, which I was in really bad shape. Still, having I was dry heaving and all sorts of things. I was still having a lot of gastrointestinal issues. Made it with about 15 minutes before the cutoff, and and then got water and continued on. But yeah, that was scary. And most of I think all of the DNFs happened before Grand Enchantment or at Grand Enchantment.
Wow.
Yeah, because it was so tight, it was so hot, and they made it tighter unintentionally by moving the aid station across the river. So you had to take your shoes off to cross the river. They didn't have to, but it seemed like the most prudent thing to do. And then when you came back across the river, well, you had to clean all the silt off your feet, because otherwise you were going to end up with blisters and all sorts of abrasion and everything. And so that took time. Anyway, you ended up taking a lot more time than you would have if it was just a normal aid station. And it was tight anyway, and it was hot. So anyway, I think that's why so many people DNF'd on that first 50 miles. After that, we were just chasing cutoffs the whole way, trying to stay ahead of them. And eventually, we just kind of accepted that. You get to where you're thinking, because you're thinking, I need to sleep, and so you're thinking, okay, if I get to the next aid station with an hour and a half before the cutoff, I can sleep for an hour and still have time to eat and get my pack refilled with water and everything. And thankfully, the cutoffs kind of get more generous as you go. The cutoff up, the speed you have to average up Lemon is actually only 1 mile per hour, and it's a very steep section climbing Mount Lemon. But it's a reasonable cutoff for that climb, and so you don't have to push yourself really hard up Lemon to meet those cutoffs. Yeah. And we had, I think she mentioned, we had a friend, Kelsey, that came out to pace us up Lemon, which is really nice. I mean, somebody there that's reasonably awake.
Yeah.
And then actually, in some ways, the descent from Lemon was worse. Because you're going, it's really steep, and it's this loose, sandy, small rock, like they're almost like little balls, right? Ball bearings. You're trying to run down, and so it's super easy to fall going down the hill. And then you get on Jeep trails, which are just have super deep ruts, and it's still the same way where it's sandy and you slip into the ruts and I ended up hurting my leg in one of those where I pulled something in the front of my shin, and I'm not sure exactly what it was. It's some sort of, I had it checked out. I was afraid it was actually a stress fracture or something, but it wasn't. It was just some sort of a soft tissue injury. But so I had to deal with that the rest of the race. It was and then you get on the bike path, which I was dreading the bike path, but actually it wasn't bad. It was nice that a lot of the cyclists knew what we were doing, and so they'd come by and cheer you on. And the locals were out, some of them, to cheer you on, and you could stop, even though it was hot. You could stop at the gas stations and little mini marts, and kind of have your own little aid station. Get a slushie or something to cool you down. And it was easier on the legs for a little while, and eventually the pounding on the asphalt gets hard on your legs, but for a while it was nice. Probably the worst section after that was between Tortilla, which is about mile 220, I think, and Oak Tree, which is about 20 miles later. You're climbing up into the Santa Rita Mountains, the foothills of the Santa Rita Mountains, and we were doing that at dark, and I was really having trouble with sleep deprivation. And by that time, we had picked up another pacer, Oliver Hines. He had DNF'd in the first section, and he came out and paced us pretty much the last 150 miles. He was with us. It was really, really nice, and I was having trouble just weaving back and forth across the trail. By that point, the sweepers had caught up with us, and so they were with us. Actually, the sweepers were great. They they want you to succeed, and I joke that you're at the back of the pack when you know the sweeper's name on a first name basis. And so, but they were with me, and anyway, I was kind of weaving back and forth, and Oliver was behind me, trying to keep me from falling off the cliff. And then finally I said I need to lay down, and so I had a talk with Cassidy and said, why don't you just go on? And she did. She and Oliver went ahead, and I just slept for a while. And when I got back up, I was feeling pretty good. But at that point, I had no confidence I was going to make it past the next aid station. And the sleep deprivation is it's bad in a 200, but it's so much worse in a 300. And I don't know, maybe it's because at 200 miles, some people can go 3 days without sleeping. But none of us can go 7 days without sleeping, without going crazy. And so, in my experience, it's that much harder. It seems to get exponentially harder as the length of the race goes on. And I never got more than an hour of sleep. I think if I'd been able to get 2 hours of solid sleep, it would have been different. But we just didn't have time for that. We were up against the cutoffs the whole way. So
that's an interesting logistical thing to point out is if obviously if you're moving faster, you're closer to the middle or the front of the pack, you can leisurely roll into a sleep station and, get your alarm clock set and your nightcap on, and, you can take your time. But, I've been in those situations too, where it's like, you've got 5 minutes here, you've got 10 minutes here, and that's it. You got to keep moving. And so then forced to sleep on the trail, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but it's not like, laying in a cot for 2 hours. So right. That makes sense to me. And then as you're progressing further into the race, you're still close to cutoffs, and you need that much more sleep as you're, because the days have gone on. And so, wow, huge kudos to you, and obviously Cassidy as well, because that's got to be really tough. That the sleep deprivation that deep into the race has got to be really hard.
Yeah, and I would love to be a little faster. And obviously we didn't plan to be at the back of the pack. That first day really set us back. And, it probably took me 3 days before I was really eating again. And so I was in such a calorie deficit, and I'm sure that contributed to the, hallucinations and made the sleep deprivation worse. Maybe we would have been, a day ahead. I'm never going to be fast, but I could see finishing in 6 days, or maybe even 5.5 days instead of 7, if in ideal conditions. But that didn't happen. So you just do what you can, right?
Yeah, exactly. But see, that's what's so cool. It kind of goes back to this human spirit, this drive. Even though you're leaning, even though you're sleep deprived, calorie deficit, you still got it done. And obviously, I'm sure it felt amazing. But I'd love to hear you actually describe what it was like to finish, because I think it's important to point out the people who are, faster or middle of the pack, front of the pack, they're pretty confident that they're going to finish, because, maybe they fall or have an injury or something crazy happens. Maybe they're not confident, but it's us at the back of the pack that the whole time we're wondering, am I going to finish this? So I'd love to hear your finishing story, what it was like with all this adversity.
Yeah. I mean, it is very stressful, because there's like Cassidy tells the story of coming into an aid station, and they asked her what she wants, and she said, a hug. Because you're wondering if you're going to get there in time. Sometimes, I mean, it wasn't, not all the time, and we weren't always the last people out of the aid station, but about half the time we were, and then so you just have this level of stress that I'm sure they don't have at the middle of the pack, where you're thinking, I don't know if this is going to happen. And so by the time we got to the last aid station, we were pretty confident. So that's Casablanca, the White House aid station, and we by that point we'd kind of gotten the rhythm down. So we said, okay, we're going to sleep, and then we're going to leave just before the cutoffs, and the cutoffs for the last section were pretty generous, so we were pretty confident we would make it, and so that felt good. That last section we could really enjoy. But even up until then, that's mile 280 something. Even going into that, we weren't confident that we were going to make it to that aid station with enough time. And it's a long section from the previous aid station, Springs. It's 22 miles, and it's this crazy trail. It does have quite a bit of up and down, but then it pretty much levels out. But it's this crazy trail where it zigzags back and forth along this ridge. I think somebody counted 22 loops. Wow. And it plays with your head, because each loop looks the same. You come up to it, and to the outermost point of the loop, and there's this tree in the middle, and there's a bunch of cow manure under the tree. And you come around the corner, and then there's this like a little conifer tree, and the marker's always on that tree at the same spot. And so, and after 3 or 4 of them, or 10, you start thinking, I'm just going in circles. I'm not getting anywhere.
Yeah, especially with a sleep-deprived, no-calorie brain. You're like,
yeah, that's right.
What is happening?
And so, yeah, that whole section was pretty stressful. But the final section was hard. We were super exhausted, but it was less stressful, since we were pretty confident we would finish. But it's not an easy section. There's some pretty steep hills, and then the last there's about a 3-mile section from the Arizona Trail down to this road, which is really steep and lots of loose rock, and it's and by that point your legs are just trashed. They've been trashed for days already, but they're you're ready for it to be over, and it's not over. And so that was hard. But we got down to the road, and it's about a 2-mile walk along the road, and a couple of guys came out to greet us, and were walking with us, and then it gradually got more and more people that joined us and were walking with us, and the celebration kind of starts at that point, even though we still have 2 miles, and we were laughing, and I was still weaving back and forth, and there were cars going past us, so every once in a while Cassidy would grab my arm and pull me out so I wouldn't get run over by a truck. And then I think I don't know if other if they do this for Cocodona, they probably do, but Destination Trail has the DFL celebration where they do a human tunnel, and that was incredible, actually, and came through it. And then since both of us volunteer so much, we know all the volunteers, and so the volunteers just kind of dogpiled on top of us, and and we're hugging us and clapping us on the back and crying, and it was I'm starting to tear up now. It was really special, special experience, and I don't want to be a DFL again, but I'm glad I experienced it.
It's just so neat because it's just such a special story, and I appreciate you sharing it. And it's just so cool. It's how celebrated it is. You and Cassidy were the toughest of the tough out there, the longest time out of the course, the most effort, and you did it. And it's just so cool how it's so celebrated within our community, versus kind of an embarrassment or something else. You proudly wear it and say, I did it. I was DFL. And any other ultra person would just go, oh my gosh, that's so awesome. Whereas if in a marathon you said, yeah, I came in last place, it's so awesome, everyone would be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, that's true.
Why are you excited? But in the ultra space, it's like, yes, that's so awesome. In some races, they even give out awards for the DFL. It's just so neat how celebrated it is, and what a special experience to share with Cassidy and the other volunteers who you've become friends with, because it's just so amazing to see loved ones and friends at the finish. And how cool is that you got to finish with one, and all the other people that you know from over the years of volunteering? How awesome is that? Yeah.
It was amazing. So
I love it. Well, I mean this. I hope when I am 64, I'm as tough and as cool as you are, still doing races and able to just tough it out. It's just so cool to me that the sport of ultra, that there's really very few barriers, age barriers or, there's definitely economic barriers. Obviously, they're not cheap, and the gear and all the food and things you have to buy. But, really anybody could really start getting after it, age, gender, whatever it is, because it's such an inclusive community, and the way that some of these races, you mentioned the one in Utah with the 40-hour cutoff, that they're really geared towards, bringing everyone together and creating a space for everyone to race. It's just really neat, and I love that about the community. But Scott, you've been so generous with your time, and what an amazing story. I can't wait to share this out with everybody. What I like to give my guests the last word. So if you have a mantra you live by, or you want to give a shout out to somebody, or maybe we touched on something that you want to come back to, I'll turn the time over to you and let you close us out.
Yeah, I guess I'd just like to reiterate how wonderful the volunteer community is, and encourage anyone who's interested in just going out and volunteering. It doesn't have to be the whole time, but for a day or two. I think the aid stations are an eye opener for anyone, especially later in the race. And so, you want to get a feel for what it's about. You can go out and volunteer at an aid station, and maybe you'll be like me and say, this is for me. Probably not. I think most people.
I don't know. The sport's growing pretty fast, so it's hooking a lot of people.
Yeah.
Well, that's perfect. I agree with you 100%. And a way to say thank you, Scott. I'm going to send you a gift from Death March Running Company. I genuinely appreciate your time, and I'm very grateful for the chance to share your story, to hear your story. So as a way to say thank you, I'm gonna get that sent out to you. So offline, we'll connect with where you want me to get it shipped to. But just, again, thank you so much for jumping on and sharing your story. It's stories like this that really motivate people and keep us going. This is kind of a selfish endeavor for me. I get to talk to all these people, and I just get so excited every time I hear these amazing stories, because, you just described, a whole human lifetime in 7 days. This adversity and pushing forward and the celebration at the end. It's just a perfect microcosm of life, and this wonderful, wonderful, inspirational story. So thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. So.
I agree. Well, Scott, we'll stay in touch, and thank you again so much.
All right.
Take care.
Take care.